I think that I'm going to start the press conference this morning, and I just want to say good morning and thank you for joining us for a press conference regarding the COVID-19 rent moratorium and freeze on foreclosures in North Dakota. My name is Barry Nelson, and I am the organizer with the North Dakota Human Rights Coalition. NDHRC is one of over a dozen nonprofits and individuals who came together late last week to request that Governor Burgum sign an emergency executive order establishing a moratorium on evictions for people affected by COVID-19, either through illness, job layoffs, or both. We met with urgency as we recognize that this week, April's rent will be due for all. Yesterday, Governor Burgum noted that there have been almost 21,000 applications filed for unemployment in North Dakota the past week, which is more than is filed in a normal year. Many of these applications come from restaurant, bar, and hotel workers who literally went overnight from working for tips and wages to nothing. Yesterday, Governor Burgum had, as he has been doing well at his conference, providing lots of information and transparency, providing information to the ag sector, to the business sector, and we commend him for doing that during this unprecedented time. Yet to the hundreds and thousands of people facing rent deadlines this week, his answer was, we'll have to wait and see, and he declined to sign the emergency order. So in response for that, we're needing to move ahead with encouraging the consideration of this really important part of our state and community. And joining me on the panel today are members of the faith community and nonprofit leaders who will address this from a moral and just the right thing to do perspective. And I'm going to list who they are and then ask them to speak in turn. They are Pastor Martin Avery, a board member of NDHRC and pastor at Canaan Moravian Church in Davenport. We have Andrea Olson, who's the Executive Director of Community Action Partnership of North Dakota. And we have Pastor Joe Larson of St. Mark's Lutheran here in Fargo. And we also have joining us and standing by Michelle Ridge, who's the Executive Director of High Plains Fair Housing. So I think we're going to open this morning. Pastor Avery, would you begin, please?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Well, good morning. We find ourselves here in this place, in a place that seems unthinkable not too long ago. And my faith tradition, we're entering this space during the season of Lent. And Lent is a time for us to really step back and reassess our course. We can slow down during Lent and allow some space into our lives for the divine to enter, change us, and change the way that we see the world around us. And well, if we're struggling with slowing down, COVID-19 has done it for us. And that slowing down doesn't mean that there's no urgency, simply that we step away from the cluttered busyness of our lives and see things a little bit differently, but then we act upon them. And it's a good starting point for some of us people of faith to maybe go back to our scriptures and take a closer look. We can go back during the time of Lent and find things that we may have missed or perhaps misunderstood, and maybe understood them in a way that actually runs counter to human flourishing. And during the season of Lent, we might find the words in the gospel that for you will always have the poor with you. And we might see how that's often lifted out of context and used as a way to take us off the hook from doing anything. Why waste our time? It seems right there in scripture that that's always going to be this way. Well, Jesus is talking to his disciples who lived in and around the poor, and they are always with them. So in this day and age, many of us spend little time with the poor, where Jesus was with them, and because he knew in his very being how they struggled and what they needed, we often don't. So when we distance ourselves from others, we don't see their needs. And in contrast, we take the governor at his word when he said yesterday, good health starts with stable housing. So in this crisis, though, we aren't seeing the needs of the people who are living paycheck to paycheck, and many who are now suddenly no longer that suddenly no longer have that. When we distance ourselves, we lose sight of statistics. Like in 2013, it's reported that 67% of poor renting families receive no federal assistance, and that most poor renting families today spend most of their income on housing. It's easy to see that during the crisis, we need to see to it that the least of these are given some immediate help, because good health starts with stable housing. We cannot wait. See, much of the aid that the governor has highlighted will be too little and too late. Thanks, Barry.
Thank you, Martin. We will be taking questions from the press after our presentation, so please stand by for that. I'm next going to introduce Andrea Olson, Executive Director, Community Action Partnership in North Dakota. Andrea, thanks for joining us this morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. I will make my comments very brief. Again, my name is Andrea Olson, and I'm the Executive Director of Community Action Partnership of North Dakota. So I work with all 7 community action agencies across the state of North Dakota. Community Action Partnership of North Dakota works with very low and moderate income individuals and families across the state. We do serve all 53 counties, and we're committed to helping people help themselves. In the wake of COVID-19, we do anticipate that the needs in our communities are going to continue to increase for those that are seeking assistance with rent and with mortgages. Data is starting to indicate that more and more people are in need of assistance. We've all seen the stark increases in unemployment rates. The community action agencies across North Dakota are deployed, and we are on the ground providing the best service possible that we can. We work very closely in conjunction, of course, with all of our community partners. We're doing all that we can to address these needs, but it's not realistic that we're going to be able to assume all of the burden and help everybody that's going to need help. Of course, these are unprecedented times, and there isn't a roadmap. We applaud the governor's response to the pandemic. Absolutely, give him a tremendous amount of kudos for the work that he has done. But we do encourage the governor to take the next best step and issue a temporary eviction moratorium and a freeze on foreclosures. Those are all my comments, Barry.
Thanks, Andrea. All right. We had invited Sister Mary Margaret Mooney, who's a member of the Presentation Sisters here in Fargo. I just want to make sure. I don't believe she is on the call, but I just want to put the call out to see if she did join us. All right. Well, we do have Pastor Joe Larson from St. Mark's Lutheran. Pastor, would you speak to us at this time?
Thanks, Barry. Well, today we are faced with a health crisis on the scale most of us have never experienced before. As pastor of St. Mark's Lutheran in Fargo, I believe during these difficult days that people of faith and our government and community leaders need to stand up for the vulnerable of our society. The Bible talks about that over and over again. In Leviticus 19, God tells the people of Israel, when you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap it to the very edges of the field. Leave it for the poor and the foreigner. I am the Lord your God. Psalm 82 says, defend the weak and orphan, uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed, rescue the weak and needy. Throughout the Gospels, Jesus ministers to the poor and sick and teaches his followers to practice acts of compassion. In Matthew 25, in his parable of the sheep and goats, Jesus praises those who help the needy. He says, for I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was sick and you cared for me. I was in prison and you visited me. When the people question when they did that, Jesus says, truly I tell you, whatever you did for the least of these, you did it for me. The Jewish prophets vigorously reminded their people to care for widows, aliens, orphans, and people in distress. Jesus takes this one step further. He identifies himself with the homeless and others in the margins of society. During the season of Lent, we don't have to be inside our sanctuaries, and most of us actually aren't because of all the social distancing. But we don't have to be inside our churches to see the face of Jesus. We see the face of Jesus in each person affected by this terrible disease, both in terms of health concerns, as well as the social and economic effects on individuals and families. That remains an essential challenge for all of us today, to offer a safety net for those who are one paycheck away from homelessness. Many of our state residents, many of our own friends and loved ones, even some of us in this meeting today, don't have the financial resources to continue to pay our rent or mortgage if we lose our health or job. Having worked as a social worker previously before I was a pastor, and much of that work in the LGBTQ community, I know how hard it is for many people to deal with even one kind of loss. But today, people are facing getting sick, becoming unemployed, and social isolation. We need to keep these people in the places where they are living for their own good and for the good of our community and state. Congregations like mine, St. Mark's, have been committed to helping the homeless or those struggling with housing issues through Churches United and other nonprofits in our community. Yet many of those programs currently are at capacity. We will make it through this crisis only, I think, if we are kind to one another. My congregation, St. Mark's, recently experienced that. Since last month, we've been worshiping at Temple Bethel Synagogue and paying rent to use their sanctuary on Sundays. Last week, their board voted not to require us to pay rent for the month of April. They did this as a gesture of goodwill to help us make it through this crisis. In the Jewish community, an act of kindness like that is called a mitzvah. That's the kind of righteous deeds we all need to practice today. And that's our calling as good and faithful people. As the prophet Micah once wrote, to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with our God. Together we can make it through this difficult time and create a community where justice lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor Joe. I just wanted to make maybe a couple clarifications after the press conference that was held yesterday. First of all, North Dakota Human Rights Coalition sees housing as not just a basic need, but a basic right. And so we want to advocate that this is something that is paid close attention to in our state as we go forward. We also want to make sure that it's clarified that this moratorium that we are asking the governor to sign is not canceling anyone's rent. It's basically a pause button that when rent is due and that people are not sent to collections or have their credit rating affected or that they are evicted, affecting the homelessness situation in our state that Andrea and others have already talked about. And we're also recognizing the urgency. This is not something that I know the governor talked about waiting to hear about how the aid packages will come down. People's rent are due this week. We can anticipate these kinds of assistance not to be in place probably for weeks to come. So this is not the kind of thing of wait and see that will affect the people who are being asked to pay their rent. And we know through articles that people are already receiving notice from their landlords that their rent is due and they are expected to be paying their rent this week when they come due. So the urgency is not beyond us. I'm going to open this up right now, and I wanted to close with one thing. I took one encouraging word yesterday was when the governor mentioned that he's never received so many emails and calls on an issue as he has on the moratorium. And he credited the organizing work of groups like us that are working on that. So he is hearing us, if not agreeing with the plan of action at this point. So we are going to encourage that people continue calling the governor's office. His phone number is 701-328-2200. Or you can email the governor. I think it's really, really important that he hears from North Dakotans. So now I'm going to open it up to the media for questions. I would ask if you would please introduce yourself and which media you're representing, and we'll take your questions now.
And if you're a member of the media, you may need to unmute your phone to speak.
Hi, Chris Howard from KVRR here in Fargo. Were you guys, what was your response to the governor's statement saying that, you know, he doesn't want to cause a bigger problem with this, but he still wants people to pay rent on time? That's what I took from his press conference. How do you guys respond to that?
I'm going to ask if any of our presenters would like to respond. Andrea, Pastor Joe, Pastor Martin. If not, I'll jump in, but please.
Well, I think the compassionate thing is to be flexible, that landlords and renters talk to one another. And if someone's unable to make their rent today, that they work out a plan. Same with people who have home mortgages, that the mortgage holders would be compassionate. And every situation is unique and different. And none of us really know, you know, what's going to happen in the future. Even pastors like me, we don't know, you know, what could happen with our congregation. So being flexible and compassionate is what I'm hoping our government will do.
And I think we got to give the good people of North Dakota credit that people that are currently working will continue to pay their rents regardless of this moratorium. Because if the moratorium's enacted, it isn't saying that it wipes that away. It's just putting, like Barry said, the pause button on things. It's just a step to be compassionate, because much of the aid that was talked about is not immediate. And for those folks who are thrown out of work, there's a lot of people who don't have a nest egg built up because they're working at low income jobs where they're barely scraping by and living paycheck to paycheck. So once they lose that, their ability to pay rent is greatly hampered. Some of them just can't at all.
And
Yeah,
this is Andrea from Community Action. I would echo all of those sentiments. You know, the statistic reports that 43% of Americans cannot cover a $400 emergency. And that was unrelated to COVID. That was the standing statistic before any of this ever happened. And we're seeing people now that are out of work that haven't been out of work before. This is incredibly unprecedented. And again, I would reiterate that nobody is asking that rents be waived. We all expect that these rents should be paid. We're just asking for a temporary moratorium. I think if there was ever a time to assume good intent from our fellow North Dakotans, now is that time. You know, hashtag in this together ND is something that I take very seriously. And I am subscribing to that philosophy.
Barry?
Yes.
Yeah, Merrill Pepcorn here. Just for the press's information, I believe the speaker previous to Andrea here was Martin Avery, by the way. Well, that's it.
Thank you for clarifying that. Yes, thank you. Do we have other questions from the press?
Yeah, hi, this is Tanner Robinson with WDAY here. So you guys are asking for, I guess, a temp. Huh? Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. Sorry, I was talking about my photographer. But how long would you suggest this temporary moratorium / freezing of foreclosures to last? Like, as long as the problem subsides, or just a couple of months, or what are you guys calling for?
I can answer the request in the statement that was put on the governor's desk is basically stating that the moratorium would exist as long as the emergency order that the governor issued previously was in effect. And in fact, that it would extend 90 days beyond the end of the emergency order, with the idea that just because the emergency is over does not mean suddenly everybody is on their feet and ready to go. So it's allowing some flexibility for people to get their finances back in order so that they can begin paying off their rent. Does that answer that question?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Chris Howard from KVRR here again. Just for clarification, are you guys are piggybacking off the letter that was sent by the coalition yesterday, with the same sentiments echoed? Rent freezes, late fee freezes, the likes.
Exactly. We're asking for a moratorium on eviction notices for people who are unable to pay their rent at this point, and a freeze on foreclosures during this emergency time. But yes, we are piggybacking off of that letter which came out from the, I guess we're loosely called the coalition, but we're a group of concerned citizens and organizations.
I guess I'll ask one more question if nobody
Please.
else is going to jump in here. Is there anything else that you guys as faith leaders and concerned citizens and community leaders are advocating for that maybe hasn't been talked about past rent moratoriums?
This is Barry, and I guess in response to that, Chris, I think this lends to the simplicity of it. I don't think it is any more complicated than that. That we know that we have working people in our state right now who, through no fault of their own, and actually no fault of anyone, were suddenly thrown out of work. And we're saying that we need to attend to these needs as we are to every other sector in our state. And so I think that the least we can do is make sure that people are not levied unusual late fees and fines on top of everything else. And certainly we do not want to see our homeless shelters further impacted by people having to leave their safe, secure housing. And so this just seems to be the most simple and as our faith leaders are saying, most humane and moral thing to be doing at this time. I'm just going to ask Michelle, is there anything in terms of updating from yesterday? I know you were on the press conference yesterday. Anything in terms, I know that you're getting lots of calls from people who are concerned. Anything that you'd want to add at this time? Michelle Ritz with the High Plains Fair Housing.
Yeah, hi. We haven't received any calls since my conversation yesterday on the press conference, and we did, in fact, we had a few calls, mostly at the end of last week, but I think as you know, tomorrow is rent is due, and so we're getting pretty concerned that that by the end of the week we'll get a lot more calls. High Plains Fair Housing Center does housing discrimination issues, but because there aren't a lot of landlord-tenant organizations in the state of North Dakota, we tend to get a lot of calls from folks that have concerns in rentals and landlord-tenants. So no, I'll definitely share the stories if people are willing to share their stories as we get them.
Thanks, Michelle. Any other questions from the press?
I think Haley from KFYR had a question in the chat about sending another letter to the governor today. If you guys are going to be doing that.
Good question. I do not know of any immediate plans from the again, I'm calling it a coalition, a group of individuals who are concerned about this. I think what we are doing is encouraging the public, anybody who is really concerned about this as a moral and compassionate issue, to be calling and addressing this with the governor's office, letting them know where people land on this. So I know that we generally have been having calls in the afternoons daily, so this would probably be discussed. I don't know of any immediate plans right now.
I guess this is Michelle Ridge with High Plains Fair Housing Center. I guess really the question that, as an organization that we'd like to pose to the governor is what to tell people tomorrow when they have to pay rent. We know that there will be support and there will be support forthcoming, like Pastor Joe said, but what happens tomorrow? We just want to make sure that people stay housed and they have that added stress of not being able to, make ends meet, to be relaxed during this period.
Well, and I don't think it can be understated the impact upon the housing, the homeless shelters and those places when you're looking at trying to maintain social distancing, that if we have people being evicted from their homes, trying to fit into those spaces and do that in a healthy way is just going to be impossible. So it's something that could greater compound the problems that we currently have.
Any other questions? Any other comments? Hearing none, I again really thank the press for joining us this morning. Thank other people who are on the call and who are also watching it live stream through our Facebook page. This is being recorded. We hope the problem with Facebook was resolved. So for future reference, if you want to steer people to this press conference, it should be online with North Dakota Human Rights Coalition's Facebook page. Just to reiterate that we are very supportive of this moratorium. We signed on to the letter with other organizations asking the governor for the moratorium yesterday, and we'll be continuing to press our members and other people in the community to contact the governor's office. That number will be posted on our Facebook page as well, 701-328-2200. One last chance for any other follow-up questions.
Hi, this is Richard Rockefeller.
Yes, Richard.
I wouldn't say so much a question, just a comment that, talking with earlier, we forget, we keep talking in terms of the rent and that kind of thing. And, I know that the governor probably has renters and that kind of thing, but he probably doesn't have many family renters. And how this impacts the children and the anxiety for the children, that just needs to maintain a key focus here, because in these situations, particularly for children who live in unstable environments and they become more unstable, they can't learn, they can't catch up. This is a necessity now. This is not something that the governor should be quibbling with. We need to demand that he sign this now. So I encourage everyone to call and work your networks as much as possible and keep putting that pressure, because that pressure from the people is the only thing that's going to work.
Okay. Thank you. Well, Pastor Martin, Pastor Joe, Andrea Olson, thank you so much for presenting this morning. Thanks to members of the media for joining us this morning, and for other people who joined us this morning. We will continue doing this. We hope that that we will ultimately be successful in providing support for all people in our community. I'm just reading one We did receive a question here. What do you say to people who think that this will give people who aren't doing a great job of paying rent now a free pass? I guess I open it up to other panel members. I think I would reiterate what is said already. I think as a rule, North Dakotans pay the rent, and that there are not people that are looking out for a free pass here. I do believe if people are working, they would honor their obligation, would not take advantage of this. I really truly believe there's a very, very small number of people and individuals and families this is profoundly affecting, and that's who we are hoping that this would help out. Again, we need to keep clarifying, this is not asking to write off people's rent, it's deferring the rent until the emergency is over. So thank you for that question. No free passes here. All right, I think with that, again, thank you all. And I think we'll consider that this press conference is concluded for the day. Look for further announcements, and thank you again.